Good afternoon. My name is Frank Toomey, and today we'll be discussing my innovation proposal, which is Same as Next. Today's agenda is to cover the following 7 topics over the next approximately 10 minutes. So looking at the problem and the background of that problem is that Army force management systems are too slow to respond to the growing needs of Army senior leaders. This is because Army senior leaders desire rapid change and innovation for Army structure, and the force management systems are based upon several Army databases that are antiquated, most of which date back to the 90s. These systems do not share information between them and require almost exclusive manual entry. This is a problem not only for Army senior leaders, but also leaders throughout all echelons of command of the Army, as we cannot execute change rapidly to keep pace with our adversaries. My assumptions going into the interviews were that the Army force management process is too slow and it does not meet the needs of Army senior leaders. I also assume that current operators of our force management systems are seeking a modernized solution where they can replicate data between the multiple databases. I also assumed that Army senior leaders will fund development of a new system, provided it brings savings not only in costs, but also in personal authorizations. To validate these assumptions, I conducted 10 interviews. 3 of them were with the Army senior leaders. These are the decision makers. 4 of them were with the end users of the systems themselves, and 3 interviews were with supervisors of these end users. 70% of those that were interviewed identified the force management systems themselves as the greatest problem, mainly that the systems were too old, they couldn't share data, and there's too much manual entry. 30% of the respondents identified the force management process as the greatest problem. However, in describing the problems with the process, a lot of those could be solved with updated systems. Coming out of the interviews going forward, there were no substantial change to the nature of the problem. Um, the nature of the problem pretty much met my assumptions. Issues identified with the process itself are largely derived, as I said, with shortcomings of the underlying systems. So no change necessary there. Looking at the solution, Samus Next, which is the solution, is a revolutionary database solution for the Army Force Management. It will replace all legacy systems with one innovative and automated system, and it will be directly compatible with Army IPS-A, the other large innovative system that has been devised recently. Samus Next value proposition centers on that it will provide Army senior leaders an agile, responsive force management process while saving personnel and operating costs over legacy systems. So looking at value creation, Samus Next creates value through elimination of costly and unreliable legacy systems, the reduction of costly Army structure overhead, and a reduction of personnel and maintenance costs. The benefits of Samus Next are that it will increase the speed of implementing change, it will reduce administrative personnel and maintenance costs, and it will allow greater synchronization between Army command efforts. Going forward, the 10 interviews confirmed the value of Samus Next to the Army, and there were no major shortcomings identified with the Samus Next proposal during these interviews. Looking at alternative solutions, there are 3 main alternative solutions to Samus Next. The first is to continue with legacy systems, i.e., keep the status quo, do nothing. The second is to target upgrades at specific Army databases and not overhaul the entire infrastructure. And the third is to seek contracted solutions through outside vendors and hire them to implement and maintain a solution for the Army problems. The Army has experience with all 3 of these potential solutions. With legacy systems, keeping the status quo, that comes with unacceptable manpower and maintenance costs and fails to meet senior leader needs for flexibility and speed. Looking at targeted system upgrades, those fail to provide interoperability between the remaining legacy systems, and it also fails to provide any personnel savings that are sought by senior leaders. For contracted solutions, the costs for those solutions would go beyond what Army senior leaders are willing to spend, and they also will fail to alleviate the Army of costly contracted maintenance support. For the problem space, there was not much change from the original problem space, but for the differentials, Samus Next provides the most cost-effective option. It provides the greatest personnel savings, and it eliminates contracted support over the alternatives. Looking at customer preferences, three of three Army senior leaders who are the customers preferred lower upfront costs, a force management process that can rapidly implement desired changes, and long-term cost and personnel savings. Samus Next is the only option which can provide all three of these customer demands. Looking at the customer themselves, Army senior leaders, specific general officers, those senior leaders, are the customers. These are general officers within the Headquarters Department of the Army G3 and G8. These are the customers because G3 and G8 own the SAMUS system and the force management process. And this has been validated through personal interviews with these customers. Customers have identified that they would be willing to fund development, provided it comes with long-term savings and increased efficiency of the force management process. And this was validated through interviews with them. These customers prefer direct communication as well as direct information with updates to any changes to the Samus Next system. Looking at capital and timelines, I currently estimate Samus Next will cost $4.3 million to develop. This is based upon cost analysis of similar projects in the past, and funding can be procured either directly from G3, G8 budget allocations or through the POM process. The POM process would be a lengthier process and would require stakeholder voting from outside the G3 and G8. I estimate Samus Next will take approximately 5 years to develop or to implement. 2 years, that will be developmental time of the Samus Next system itself, and it will take approximately 3 years to formally and fully incorporate Samus Next as well as sunset all legacy systems. The bottom line is Samus Next will begin to generate net savings to the Army within year 4 of the program. Looking at the estimated financial timeline, should Samus Next receive funding in early fiscal year 26, we can have the system developed and ready for implementation by the end of fiscal year 27. And by fiscal year 29, Samus Next will start generating net savings for the Army, and these net savings will continue to grow in the out years. Looking at intellectual property and market security, Samus Next will be developed and owned by the United States government. Therefore, it is not subject to copyright per the Copyright Act of 1976. However, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement 227-72 grants the Army unlimited rights, and there are other defense regulation supplements that will ensure sensitive aspects of Samus Next will be secured from duplication and sharing to non-governmental entities. Secret versions of Samus Next will incorporate standard security protocols. So looking at lessons learned, the stakeholder interviews generally confirmed my pre-interview assumptions. However, these interviews brought forward several critical questions that will need addressing. The first is what to do with displaced civilian personnel. This question is a bit out of scope for this project. However, it is a valid question that will require Army senior leader decision going forward. How do we address organizational design inefficiencies within the FM process? There were some design inefficiencies that were exposed through these interviews that cannot be solved through a new database system. These inefficiencies will need to be addressed through Army senior leader decision in order to complement the new Samus Next infrastructure. The third critical question needing addressing is how to best market Samus Next to ensure funding. Whereas the G3, G8 can fund internally, should Samus Next need to be funded through the POM process, we will need to market the system for external stakeholders in order to gather their votes and them to vote for funding in the POM process. And finally, the last critical question is more in-depth research will need to be done to determine any hidden developmental costs that will need to be fleshed out. These questions, there are certain working groups that will need to be formed in order to answer them fully going forward. Thank you very much and have a good day.